From the hallway. My mother's voice cracked like glass. From today, consider yourself a stranger. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. The air was thick with the smell of fresh paint, the kind that clings to the back of your throat, and the sunlight coming through the windows made her pearls glint like knives. But when she looked at me, chin high, lips pressed in that perfect line, I knew she meant it. Vivian Morgan had always believed that silence and control were forms of love. Even now. She didn't shout. She pronounced my exile the way she'd announce a dinner reservation. Behind her stood my father, Richard Morgan, arms folded, his expression a cold mirror of hers. He didn't say a word, but his silence felt like the final verdict. I laughed a small, broken sound that didn't belong to me. A stranger, I'm your daughter. But the door slammed before the word daughter even reached her. The echo traveled down the marble hallway, into the kitchen where I'd learned to bake, past the staircase where my childhood photos still hung. Then the lock clicked, sharp and final. The house, my home for 27 years, had just spat me out. I stood there, the brass key still warm in my palm. A minute ago, it had opened every room in my life. Now it was just metal. I pressed my forehead against the wood, whispering, "Please, just open. Say it was a mistake." Nothing. Through the window next door, Mrs. Callahan, our neighbor who never missed a scandal, peeked through her curtains. Her eyes met mine for a heartbeat before she turned away. Even gossip had its limits when the story looked too painful to touch. The word stranger rang in my ears, heavy as thunder. Once, when I was 12, my mother used to braid my hair and say, "You're my reflection, Clara." I used to love that word reflection. It meant I was part of her, that we were the same. Standing in front of that locked door now, I realized the reflection had cracked a long time ago. My suitcase waited by the porch. I picked it up slowly, one trembling hand gripping the handle. The wheels scraped against the concrete as I walked away, each sound too loud in the quiet street. My father's car was parked in the driveway, spotless as always. I half expected him to follow, to stop me, to say this was some cruel misunderstanding, but the curtains stayed closed, and no one came. At the end of the street, I turned back once. The house gleamed under the afternoon sun, perfect and untouchable like a picture in a magazine. From here, it didn't look like a home. It looked like a museum where love had died long ago. Hi, I'm Clara Morgan, 27 years old, and that was the moment I learned what it feels like when home doesn't just let you go, it throws you out. The first night. I didn't cry. I just stared at the ceiling of Tessa's spare room, watching a cracked paint line crawl toward the light fixture like a vein. It hummed when the heater kicked in steady, mechanical. Nothing like the house I'd grown up in where silence used to mean peace. Here, silence sounded like being erased. Tessa had been my college roommate once, the kind of friend who always smelled like coffee and chaos. When she opened the door that night, mascara smudged and wine glass in hand, she didn't ask questions. She just said, "You can stay as long as you need." I nodded, dropped my suitcase, and tried to breathe without shaking. The days blurred together. Morning coffee turned cold before I could drink it. I scrolled through old photos on my phone, family dinners, birthdays, the house glowing with laughter that now felt staged. Every image looked like a lie I hadn't noticed while I was living in it. By the third night, the word stranger began to lose sound but not meaning. I whispered it again and again, trying to understand how a mother could carve that word into her child like scripture. When I closed my eyes, I saw my father standing behind her, silent, always silent. It wasn't anger that haunted me, it was his quiet. Tessa tried to distract me, suggested movies, wine, work, gossip, anything that sounded normal. But normal had packed up and left with me. Every time I picked up my phone, a small part of me hoped for a message, a call, even a mistake. Nothing came. Not from Vivian, not from Richard. Outside. The weather shifted rain one day, sun the next. Inside. I barely noticed. I started talking to the ceiling, rehearsing things I wished I'd said. You can't erase me. I'm still your daughter. But each line fell flat, useless against the memory of that slammed door. A week passed. I counted the days like bruises. Then, on the 7th night, my phone buzzed. Unknown sender. Subject line in all caps. Urgent. We have a problem. It wasn't from my mother. Not my father. It was from Mr. Harris, the family lawyer. And for the first time since the door shut, I didn't feel broken. I felt curious. The email arrived just after midnight, glowing at the top of my inbox like a flare in the dark. My hands hovered above the phone, hesitant, as if opening it would break whatever fragile distance I'd built between me and them. The subject line screamed, urgent. We have a problem. The sender, Harris and Feldman Law Associates, my parents' firm. For a moment, my heart tripped over itself. Maybe this was a cruel mistake, a mass email, something impersonal. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. It burns, even when you know it will hurt. I opened it. Ms. Clara Morgan, your immediate attention is required regarding your parents, Vivian and Richard Morgan. Please call at your earliest convenience. Matter is urgent. No warmth, no greeting, no explanation. Just urgency. I read it twice, 3 times. My reflection trembled in the cracked screen. Eyes hollow but awake for the first time in days. My first instinct was anger. How dare they reach out through someone else, as if I were an employee instead of a daughter. But beneath the anger, something sharper stirred. A question. What problem could possibly make them remember me now? I showed the message to Tessa, who was half asleep on the couch. Are you going to call? She murmured. I don't know. I said, but my voice didn't sound unsure, it sounded steady, cold. That night, sleep felt impossible. I lay awake, staring at my phone, at the words urgent and problem. For a family obsessed with perfection, those words were poison. I imagined my mother pacing the marble floor, her control slipping one crack at a time, my father's silence no longer calm, but panicked. By dawn, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of untouched coffee, staring at my phone again. The key they'd made useless still lay beside it, a reminder of everything I'd lost. I picked it up, turned it in my fingers, and whispered, What do you need now, Mother? Then, before I could talk myself out of it, I dialed Mr. Harris's number. He answered on the second ring, and that was the moment everything started to turn. Miss Morgan, thank you for calling back, said a man's clipped, professional voice. Mr. Harris. My parents' longtime attorney, always polite, always distant. I could almost hear the leather of his office chair creak as he continued. Your parents are facing a minor issue. There's a trust transfer that requires your signature. It's simply a formality. A formality? I nearly laughed. Being disowned wasn't formal enough. Apparently they needed legal confirmation. And why exactly? I asked, does a stranger need to sign your client's documents? There was a pause. Long enough for me to imagine him blinking behind his glasses. Your name is still listed, Ms. Morgan. You're essential to the process. Essential. The word tasted bitter and electric all at once. For the first time in a week, I didn't feel invisible. I felt dangerous. My parents must be thrilled, I said quietly. Tell them I'll think about it. Miss Morgan. They asked me to, but I hung up before he finished. The phone buzzed again, almost immediately calls, messages, numbers I didn't recognize. One from my mother, one from my father. I didn't answer any of them, for years. Their silence had taught me obedience. Now mine taught them fear. I set the phone down, hands trembling but not from pain. It felt strange, this new quiet power pulsing through my chest. The same people who'd slammed the door in my face were suddenly desperate to hear my voice. The key still lay on the table beside me, useless but shining under the kitchen light. I smiled faintly. "Strangers," I whispered. "Don't sign papers." For the first time since that door closed, I wasn't begging for entry. I was the one deciding who got in. That night, sleep refused to come. I sat in the dim glow of Tessa's kitchen, surrounded by half-empty coffee mugs and silence that pulsed like a heartbeat. My phone blinked with missed calls. Vivian, Richard, even a few numbers marked private. Every buzz felt like a ghost tapping at the door I'd already closed. I didn't pick up. At 2 a.m., another email came in from Mr. Harris. This time, it had attachments legal documents scanned into neat PDFs. My hands shook as I opened them, page after page filled with clauses and stamps and numbers that meant nothing to me. And then I saw it. Beneficiary Clara Morgan. My name. Bold, permanent, inked into their empire long before they decided I was expendable. The air left my lungs. For all the years they made me feel replaceable, disposable. Here was proof that I mattered in black and white. They couldn't delete me. Not legally. Not completely. I laughed, a quiet sound that startled even me. The word beneficiary echoed in my head, sharp and bright. I imagined my mother seeing it now, her perfect world cracking as she realized I was the piece she couldn't remove. I forwarded the files to Mr. Beckett, Tessa's uncle and an old attorney who owed me a favor. He called within an hour, his voice calm but curious. "Clara," he said, "this isn't just urgent, it's leverage. If you handle this right, they'll come crawling. Crawling." The word pulsed in my mind like a drumbeat. For years, I had done the crawling begging for approval, bending under their expectations. I'd cooked Thanksgiving dinners alone while they entertained guests, covered my father's debts when his investments failed, swallowed insults dressed as advice. Now, the ground had shifted. They needed me, and I didn't have to move an inch. I looked at the useless house key still sitting beside my phone. A week ago, it had symbolized everything I'd lost. Tonight, it gleamed like a reminder some locks stay closed because you no longer want to open them. Outside, the first light of morning crept over the city. For the first time in days, I felt awake. They had thrown me out, but now they couldn't move without me. By the next morning, the storm had settled into something colder clarity. I sat at Tessa's kitchen table. The legal papers spread out in front of me like a deck of cards I finally knew how to play. The house was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and Tessa's soft breathing in the next room. My phone buzzed again, another call from Mr. Harris, then from my mother. I ignored them both. For the first time in my life, their desperation didn't scare me. It steadied me. When Mr. Beckett called, his tone was almost casual, but beneath it ran something electric. "You hold more power than they ever wanted you to know," he said. "Power," I repeated. The word felt foreign, heavy. "Legal power," he clarified. "That trust fund can't move an inch without your consent. They built their legacy around you. Clara, they just forgot you were real." I leaned back, staring at the morning light crawling across the floor. A week ago, I'd been begging for belonging. Now, belonging was irrelevant. What I had was leverage, and leverage was louder than love. "Mr. Beckett," I said slowly, "what would you do if the people who raised you tried to erase you?" He paused, then answered, "I'd remind them who taught me how to fight." The line went quiet, and something inside me clicked into place. I wasn't their shadow anymore. I was their consequence. When the phone rang again, Vivian's name lighting up the screen, I didn't flinch. I let it buzz until it stopped, until silence wrapped around me like armor. For years, I'd spoken softly to be loved. Now, I was ready to speak only when it mattered and make every word cost them. It started with a single message from my mother. The same number that had been silent for days now blinked on my screen, trembling between apology and command. Clara, we need to meet. Tonight. It's complicated. Her words were brittle, like glass on the verge of breaking. For a long moment, I just stared at them. The same woman who had called me a stranger now wanted to meet as if we were still family, as if the door had never slammed. I typed 3 words and deleted them, then 4 more. Nothing sounded right. Finally, I set the phone down. The old version of me, the obedient daughter, would have rushed over, desperate to understand, to fix, to please. But that girl was gone. When Tessa came home that evening, I showed her the message. "Are you going?" she asked carefully. I shook my head. No, strangers don't rearrange their schedules. Still, the message sat in my chest like a heartbeat that refused to slow. That night, I dreamt of the house again, the smell of lemon polish, the sound of my father's footsteps echoing across marble floors. I woke up drenched in cold sweat, the ache of nostalgia and anger tangled together. The next morning, another email arrived. Subject, family dinner, Saturday night. Please come. This time, it was formal, almost rehearsed, as if written by someone who wanted to sound calm while drowning. Dinner. The word made me laugh out loud. Family dinners in our house had always been performances. Vivian performing grace, Richard performing authority, and me performing silence. Mr. Beckett called that afternoon. "They're not inviting you to reconcile," he warned. "They're cornered. Don't go unprepared." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm going." I spent that night awake, thinking about every time they'd used my loyalty against me, every time silence had been their weapon and I'd mistaken it for peace. But silence cuts both ways. On Saturday, I dressed in black, a color my mother always said drained me. A simple dress, sharp lines, heels that clicked like punctuation marks on pavement. In the mirror, my reflection looked like someone I hadn't met before, calm, composed, unrecognizable. The girl they threw out had vanished. In her place stood someone who no longer asked for permission to exist. As I drove toward the house, the sun dipped low, staining the sky in amber. The closer I got, the heavier the air felt, thick with ghosts of old expectations. When the house finally appeared on the hill, lights glowing through drawn curtains, I smiled to myself. They thought they were inviting their daughter back, but I was coming as their reckoning. The Morgan house glowed from a distance, all warm light and illusion. From the outside, it looked like perfection columns gleaming, windows framed with gold light, but to me, it felt like approaching a crime scene. My heart beat steady, not from fear, but from focus. When I parked at the curb, the air smelled of rain and rosemary. My heels clicked across the driveway, each sound cutting through the quiet. The door opened before I could knock. Richard Morgan, my father, stood there. His tie was crooked, his hair thinner, his authority cracked. He didn't call me honey or sweetheart. He just stepped aside. "Come in," he muttered. Inside, everything looked exactly the same. The chandelier still threw its diamonds of light across the table. The family portraits still smiled from the walls. But something had changed. The air itself was heavy, like the house was holding its breath. Vivian Morgan sat at the table, posture perfect as ever, hands wrapped around a glass of wine she hadn't touched. "Clara," she said, her voice soft, rehearsed. "We're glad you came. Glad I came." The irony was almost sweet. I sat down slowly, back straight, shoulders square. The chair at the far end, my old seat, was waiting for me, polished, untouched. Once upon a time, I'd been told to earn that chair. Tonight, I owned it. For a while, no one spoke. The only sound was the clink of silverware against plates that no one touched. My siblings, Evan and Grace, exchanged glances but stayed silent. The show had begun, and we all knew our roles. Finally. Richard cleared his throat, the sound cracking through the silence. Clara, we may have overreacted. Last week was emotional. I tilted my head, my fingers tracing the rim of my water glass. Overreacted, I said softly. That's what you call disowning your daughter. Throwing her out like trash. Vivian flinched, her smile tightening. You know, we didn't mean it like that. Families fight. But right now, we need you to understand there are some documents. There it is. I interrupted, my voice low but sharp. The truth. This isn't about family. This is about control, about money, about you needing the signature of the stranger you created. The word stranger hit like a slap. My mother's knuckles whitened around her glass. Richard's jaw clenched. Clara, he said, his voice rising. You don't understand what's at stake. I met his eyes steady, cold. No, I understand perfectly. What's at stake is everything you thought you could keep without me. And now, suddenly, I matter again. Silence. Real silence, the kind that doesn't fill space. It devours it. Evan shifted in his chair, uncomfortable, while Grace looked down at her plate like a child hiding from lightning. Vivian's voice trembled when she tried again. Sweetheart, please. We're trying to make this right. I laughed, softly, bitterly. You don't make things right because you love me. You do it because you need me. There's a difference. Richard's temper broke first. His fist slammed against the table, rattling the silverware. You're being ungrateful. Everything we built, everything you have came from us. I stood slowly, letting the echo of his anger fade before I spoke. Everything you built, I said evenly, was on my name, my trust, my work, my silence. You built walls around me and called it protection. But you forgot one thing. Father, when you sever something, sometimes it doesn't grow back. My mother's lips parted as if to speak, but nothing came out. I could see it then, panic disguised as pride. She wasn't afraid of losing me. She was afraid of losing control. I placed my napkin gently on the table, a small, deliberate gesture of ending. I'll think about your request, I said. But remember, this strangers don't save families. The words hung in the air, thick and final. I turned toward the door. The sound of my heels against the polished floor filled the room, sharp and steady. No one followed. No one stopped me, behind me. The Morgan family sat frozen in their perfect dining room, a portrait of power collapsing in silence. When I reached the foyer, I glanced back once. The chandelier light caught my mother's face, and for the first time, she looked small, fragile, even. Good night, Mother, I said quietly, and good luck. Outside, the air was cool and alive. The door clicked shut behind me, not slammed, just closed. It was almost gentle, as if the house itself understood this time who belonged and who didn't. I stood on the porch for a moment, breathing in the night. The lights from the dining room spilled through the curtains, flickering against the glass like ghosts trying to escape. I walked down the steps without looking back again. My car waited at the curb, the engine cold, the world ahead open. Inside that house, my parents were realizing the truth. The daughter they'd discarded had returned not for forgiveness, but for reckoning. And I'd served it cold, just the way they'd taught me to survive. By the time I reached the city, rain had started to fall, soft and steady against the windshield. Each drop felt like punctuation to an ending I hadn't realized I'd been writing. I parked outside Tessa's apartment and sat there for a while, the engine humming beneath my hands. My phone blinked again, 10 missed calls, 5 new voicemails, all from home. I didn't listen to any of them. When I finally went inside, the silence wrapped around me differently than before. It wasn't empty anymore. It was peaceful. Tessa looked up from the couch, worry etched into her face. How did it go? She asked. I smiled, not out of joy, but understanding. They wanted dinner, I said. I gave them a lesson. Over the next few days, the messages multiplied. Emails with subject lines like, "Please reconsider and the estate is at risk." My lawyer, Mr. Beckett, called to confirm what I already suspected my parents' empire was cracking. Without my signature, their accounts were frozen, their investments paralyzed. Then came the headlines. Morgan Family Trust under legal investigation. The perfect dynasty collapsing in public view. I didn't gloat. I didn't answer. I just forwarded every message to Beckett and went for long walks, letting the city noise drown out the ghosts of my childhood home. One night, my brother Evan showed up outside my building. Eyes hollow. "Dad hasn't slept. Mom barely eats," he said. "They're falling apart." I met his gaze. Steady, unshaken. Did they think about me when they locked me out? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. When he left, I watched the rain slide down the glass, streaking the city lights. For the first time, I didn't feel outside my family, I felt beyond it, and that was its own kind of freedom. The courthouse smelled of paper, polish, and fear. The kind of fear that sits heavy in the chest because it's dressed as dignity. I walked through the marble hallway, heels echoing like a countdown, and saw them Vivian and Richard Morgan, my parents, seated at the far end of the courtroom. The same people who once made me feel invisible now looked like ghosts of themselves. My mother's pearls hung loose around her neck. My father's hands trembled slightly against the table. For the first time in my life, they looked small. The judge's voice filled the room with measured calm. Without the beneficiary's consent, the trust remains frozen. Assets will be redistributed under state oversight. Each word landed like a stone dropped into deep water. Vivian flinched. Richard exhaled a sound that wasn't quite a sigh, wasn't quite a sob. The empire they built on control was crumbling in daylight. When the gavel fell, it sounded final. The lawyers began to gather their papers, but my parents stayed seated. My mother turned toward me, eyes glistening, not the sharp, commanding gaze I grew up with, but something human, fragile. "Clara," she whispered, reaching out across the aisle. "Please, help us. We're family." That word again, family. The one they'd weaponized. The one that used to make me obey. I stood, slow and steady, my heartbeat matching the rhythm of my heels on the floor as I crossed the space between us. "Family," I said quietly, "shows up when you're broken. Family doesn't lock you out with a useless key. Family doesn't call you a stranger." I paused, meeting her eyes, watching the reflection of realization form there. "You taught me what family isn't. And today, I finally learned what it is me choosing myself." Her hand trembled in the air, still waiting for me to take it. I didn't. I turned and walked toward the exit, every step an ending. Outside, sunlight poured over the courthouse steps, warm and clean, like the world had been holding its breath and finally exhaled. I stopped at the edge, pulled the old house key from my pocket, its brass dull, its edges worn. For years, I'd carried it like a wound. Now it felt weightless. I dropped it into the trash can beside the steps. It landed with a soft, metallic clink, barely a sound. But somehow it echoed louder than the door that had once slammed behind me. People passed by strangers with places to be, lives to live, and for once, I felt like one of them. Not the daughter begging to be let back in. Not the girl defined by her family's cruelty. Just Clara Morgan whole, unowned and free. As I walked into the sunlight, a small smile found its way to my lips. They had called me a stranger, and now, finally, I was one by choice.